welcome to this online lesson. My name is Mr. Hoven, and today we're going to be looking at World War II, the United States involvement, and focusing on the European theater, or the European side of World War II. If you remember from last time, we were discussing the United States and their mobilization on the home front in order to join the war effort. So now we are mobilized, we are ready to go, and we're going to take it to the Nazis. Now, in January 1st, 1942, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, the United States joined Britain, the Soviet Union, and 23 other allied nations in vowing to defeat the Axis powers. And although there were two theaters, there was the European theater with Hitler and Mussolini, but there was also the Pacific theater with Japan and Hideki Tojo, the United States, along with the other allies, agreed to focus their efforts on defeating Germany first. So they were going to go out and defeat Hitler and his Nazis first. The situation in Europe was desperate because German forces occupied almost all of Europe and much of North Africa. And it was so important to win the war in Europe because if the Germans defeated the Soviets on the Eastern Front, Germany might prove to be unstoppable. So we are looking at the United States involvement and the tide turning with the war in Europe. We're going to start by looking at the German-Soviet conflict along the border of Poland and the Soviet Union. Now, Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, and German troops advanced into the country's interior. They began to lay siege or military blockade for the city of Leningrad that lasted nearly 900 days. Thousands of people died, yet the Germans could not take the city. So again, Germany's already invaded parts of the Soviet Union, and they're trying to take it over, but they're starting to see some initial difficulties. There were other major battles in the Soviet Union. Germans advanced on several Soviet cities, one which being Moscow, and there was such wintry conditions it slowed the German advance. And the Soviet counterattack led to a German retreat. So again, they start trying to fight in the winter in Russia. Maybe not the best idea. And in the Battle of Stalingrad, Germans quickly took the city in 1942. However, the Soviets surrounded the city and starved the Germans into surrender in 1943. And although the Germans tried to retake these Soviet cities, Stalingrad marked a major turning point in the war. Just to recap, Hitler studied Napoleon. Napoleon was a very famous leader from many years past who invaded the Soviet Union or Russia and lost. Because when you try to invade the Soviet Union or Russia in the winter, you're not going to be able to hold up. So Hitler, he studied Napoleon. You know you shouldn't probably invade Russia, but he does during winter. Epic fail. Many people say that Hitler deciding to go after the Soviet Union was his only blunder, which led to his downfall in World War II. And while this was occurring, this battle of the German Nazi forces and the Soviet Union in the east, on the Western Front, the Allies were preparing Operation Overlord, or the invasion of France by the United States and other forces. Operation Overlord was the invasion of occupied Europe. This was led by General Eisenhower, and he may become president later on. And their goal was to focus the invasion would be on Normandy, France. So the battle for Normandy, and we'll be looking at that right now. So, D-Day. This was extremely significant, and there were 4 major steps that kind of led to this day occurring. So on June 6, 1944, ships carried troops across the English Channel to the French province of Normandy. Paratroopers were dropped inland along coastal beaches to start an assault on the beaches and weaken German defenses. So we've got first and second steps right now. Third step, at dawn, Allied ships began their barrage of shelling. So they began shelling major bombs into the cliffs and the beaches of Normandy and of this area of France. The target beaches of Utah, Omaha, Gold, Sword, and Juneau were different areas where the United States, Great Britain, and Canadian forces tried to invade. Allied troops waded onto the beaches, meeting with heavy, heavy gunfire, grenades, and mines. There were enormous casualties during this battle for Normandy, but it was some place that needed to be taken. Despite huge casualties, the Allies had landed 58,000 American troops, along with 75,000 British and Canadian troops. German power was beginning to slip away. So, looking forward on towards victory in Europe, Germany fought for survival as Soviet forces pushed from the east and American and British forces from the west. The advance across France was so rapid that many believed the war would end soon. So the United States, France, Great Britain were able to push the Germans so far, they thought, oh, this will be a very quick, very easy battle. In December of that year, however, the Germans counterattacked along a 50-mile front in Belgium, as you can see right here on the slide. As their troops advanced, they pushed back into Allied lines, creating a bulge. This attack became known as the Battle of the Bulge, and after weeks of fighting, the Americans won the battle and headed into Germany. This was not an easy victory, but it was one that helped push the Germans back. By late 1944, the Soviets had driven the Germans from Russia to Poland, and by February 1945, Soviet troops were outside of Berlin. Realizing the situation was hopeless, Hitler, quote-unquote, committed suicide in order to escape any war retributions when he was captured. We'll look at his, quote-unquote, suicide more in class. Germany signed an unconditional surrender on May 7th, ending the war in Europe. 1945. The Allies declared May 8th VE Day for Victory in Europe Day. Now the war in Europe was over, and it was up to the United States and the Allies to focus their efforts on defeating the Japanese in the Pacific. However, President Roosevelt was unable to see the end of this war completely. On April 12, 1945, Roosevelt died suddenly of a brain hemorrhage. And Americans were greatly saddened by the passing of the president who had led them through 12 difficult years. Remember, he served more than 2 terms. And his vice president, Harry Truman, became president and would see us through the rest of the war. I hope you enjoyed this online lesson. Next time we'll be looking at World War II in the Pacific Theater, or World War II against the Japanese. We'll see you next time.